Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see how it looks. That still works, right?
That's good. I can just use this one for slide. Probably want to. She's going to use that as her.
Hey there, how are you doing?
Sorry, it's 10th week, and all the students are like
I'm totally
behind,
okay.
and it's embarrassing. Don't take it
I'm
personally.
not embarrassed.
I mean, it's hard enough
I've
to get
organized
students to go to lectures
video.
anyway, but
Okay, so everybody has to pretend they're in a TV studio. And I'm reassured that there's students streaming this while doing work, so we're out there somehow. Well, welcome to Ellen Lupton, who is a curator at the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum and chair of graphic design in Maryland Institute College of Art. I would like to mention her two most recent projects that are quite interesting and provocative. The one that's currently up and running is called Skin, Surface, Substance, and Design, that looks at the convergence of natural and artificial lives in our daily manifestations, furniture, fashion, any kind of objects that surround us. And then another one which I was quite interested to read about is called Comfort Zone, which is an exhibition of portable fabric structures by contemporary artists and designers who respond to human needs for comfort, safety, escape, and survival. All of these themes are really interesting, and what's great about Ellen's work is that she is able to articulate and contextualize a lot of contemporary design. One thing we've noticed in trying to look at design and media is the lack of that kind of critical thinking and writing, and Ellen has certainly been one to fill that gap. She has written and co-authored 10 books, numerous articles, and is a very active speaker nationally and internationally. Please give a warm welcome to Ellen Lupton.
Okay. Thanks. It's great to be back here. It certainly is a warm welcome in this room. What I'm going to do is talk to you a little bit about some of my projects as a curator, writer, designer. And I just picked a few that are indicative of some different areas that I work in. I actually won't talk about the two that Victoria just mentioned because I talked about that in February, and so I'll do something else. I have sort of an unusual career in that I'm a curator of design. I was trained as a designer at Cooper Union in the early 80s, became a curator and critic of design, and my practice as a designer is always folded into the content that I'm developing. So I have very few clients. Occasionally I have a museum client and work on exhibition identities or publications for museums. But really, most of the work I do as a designer is related to an exhibition or book for which I am the author and the curator. And I titled my talk for today, The Designer as Producer. And that's a way of looking at design as a set of tools for initiating content or product development or spectacle, as opposed to design always being reactive to the needs of a pre-given client. And that's how my work as a designer functions. And it's a way that design was practiced in the early 20th century by the people that invented the modern profession of design. And in my work as a curator, basically there's three areas that I look at. One is design in the avant-garde, the 1910s, the 1920s, the period of invention of the design discipline. And I brought a catalog from a project that I'll leave with you all for your collection. I also look at industrial design, American popular culture, American consumerism as an area. And finally at contemporary design, both American and international. So I'll talk about a little bit of each of those areas today, and again, I have some books that I'll leave with you. Herbert Bayer created this diagram of the modern exhibition in 1930, and Bayer was one of the people that tried to treat graphic design as environmental, as architectural, by creating exhibitions, and this is his diagram of the spectator in a modern exhibition. And he was a great graphic designer at the Bauhaus who looked at design as a multimedia cross-disciplinary activity. I also pulled this slide out because it's sort of the giant housewife. And that's another thing that curators are. We are housewives of objects and culture. And this image of this mechanical female sort of towering large there struck me as another way to look at the designer in our time, and this notion of the designer as producer. The great German critic and philosopher and theologian Walter Benjamin wrote an essay called The Author as Producer in the 1930s, where he called for the writer of the 20th century to revolutionize not only the content that he or she would write about, but to revolutionize the means of production, to find new ways of putting literary content out in the world, through the illustrated press, through newspapers, through broadcast media. He was a friend of Moholy-Nagy, who's shown here, the great Hungarian designer, teacher, writer, publisher, sculptor, photographer. These people, like Moholy-Nagy, are the ones that invented the profession that now students go to art schools to study, and became codified into a set of principles and a way of working and a business and industry. The people that invented it in the 1920s didn't see themselves just as graphic designers. It was a term that barely existed. They saw themselves as producers in the visual realm, and producers that came to design because it was a public form of art, and it was a form of art that mobilized the media of that time: photography, film, the printing press, advertising, the product world. That was this great revolutionary notion for people like Moholy-Nagy. When Walter Benjamin wrote his essay, The Author as Producer, he did it with knowledge of this new kind of visual creator, people like Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, or the most influential figure of that period, El Lissitzky, who here represents himself as the constructor, defining a new way of being an artist, one who constructs, one who builds, one who produces, okay? And in my book, Graphic Design in the Mechanical Age, I talk a lot about production and how the designers of this time invented a style that specifically mobilized technology, often in a mythological way, in a somewhat frustrated way. And I won't go into detail about that in my talk today, but that's a whole area of my research, is how designers historically approach the tools of production. And that's what designers are doing now. The tools are different, but many of the goals are the same. And the goals are to not have form be dictated by the media at our disposal. That what we want to teach our students to do is to control the media, and to use it in inventive ways that aren't predefined by software or printing processes. So there's El Lissitzky. Another such figure, less well known, is the Viennese philosopher and social scientist Otto Neurath, who in the 1920s invented a system of communicating visually to international audiences using pictograms. And those pictograms had an incredible life in 20th century culture. They became the basis of airport signage and icons on the Mac and so forth. The whole 20th century obsession with speaking through pictures was invented by someone who'd never defined himself as a graphic designer, defined himself as an educator, as someone who is going to revolutionize communication by changing the language. So here's from one of his books. He created books, he designed exhibitions, promoting a kind of international universal speech. Otto Neurath. And there's a whole essay in one of my books, Design Writing Research, about this particular person. and this is the book, which I published in 1996 with my partner Abbott Miller, and it was a project that brought together about 10 years worth of writing on design history and theory, specifically graphic design, including an essay on this international picture language, the idea of communicating through icons. And throughout the book, we use the design of the pages to express the content. So it was never pure text, never generic text. It was always about page design. And again, I brought a copy that I'll leave with you. So for example, in this essay, instead of having the pictograms be separate illustrations, they're inserted directly into the lines of text, not upside down, but forgive me for that. So that as you read, you would actually be reading the pictures, and you would be confronted by the ways in which they are like language and not like language, the way they... No, I've inserted various ones. The whole essay is really about the history of it, but he's the one that historically introduced the idea and promoted it very actively in Europe and then in the United States. In a sense, he's the father of Helvetica Man. And in the essay, we talk about how this style of icon became associated with a very specific, deliberately universal, abstract style of image making, which related to corporate identity and logos and to the dream in the 1920s and 30s of creating an international, universal language that was not culturally specific. And of course, everything is culturally specific. And so one would be quite shocked to see Helvetica Man with serifs. And in our essay, we sort of looked at variations of how such a figure might exist typographically. And this is really what a lot of my work is about, looking at visual culture as it exists and attempting to uncover new sides of it, or to see the assumptions behind it, to see what it says about the world that we live in. Imagine a more elegant version of Helvetica Man, or Helvetica Man in a big hurry. Another area of my research deals with American consumer culture and industrial design, and linking the world of objects to the world of advertising and marketing imagery. So this is a book and exhibition that I did in 1992 at MIT about the history of the American bathroom and kitchen as they related to the emergence of a consumer-based economy, which took place around the same time historically, where you have the invention of an economy that's predicated on the continual buying and replacement of goods, consumption in the economic sense. At the same time, you have the invention of hygienic laboratories of consumption architecturally in the home, in the bathroom, and the kitchen. So this is some shots from the installation of this. Whoops. Seem to have lost my image. I don't see any light coming out of that hole anymore. My doing something.
So it's, we were just canvassing through.
Yeah.
You're right, no lights, I'll check.
Okay. So basically the thesis of the exhibition was that the technologies for managing waste in the home, toilets and refrigerators and gas stoves and so forth, that all of those were being developed around the same time as consumerism in the product sense was taking place, and that some of the visual characteristics of modern design come from the bathroom and the kitchen, that these are places where a machine aesthetic, an aesthetic of clean forms, of exposed technology. That was the first place you were allowed to see technology in the American middle-class home, is in the bathroom and the kitchen, in these places dedicated to consumption in the bodily sense. So in the exhibition, we brought together incredible appliances, entire kitchen suites and bathroom sinks and toilets, showing the evolution of those spaces, and presented it in relation to the emergence of the industrial design profession, which as a field promoted itself to American business as a profession of waste making, a profession of styling, of creating objects that used technology and form together to appeal to emotions and to create a kind of cycle of consumption and waste economically. And I have some slides to show you of it. If I could show you the book, too. This is the book that we published, actually the second edition of the book. And it's kind of a little compendium of imagery and quotations and industrial material, and I could just pass it around. People can take a look at it. What?
Do you summon Duchamp?
Yes, we refer to Duchamp, who said that America's greatest works of art were her toilets and her bridges. And that, America was incredible with innovating these forms of technology. Now I've lost my remote. Oh, okay, great. In the installation, we created a kind of network of platforms made out of, just of unfinished wood and J-bead and screen door mesh. We call it outhouse modern. Very simple structures that let you see between the walls, let you see between the kitchen and the bathroom to connect these spaces. All the objects are sitting in a bed of peat moss, which was a way to bring in kind of reference to organic material, to brown stuff, in the context of these gleaming, clean, industrial objects. And we showed the objects in relation always to what we called an image band across the top, which was advertising photographs, film stills, photographs of complete domestic interiors, to show the kind of social life of the objects. And that's something that's consistent in all of my work. It's never about just showing an object or a piece of design as kind of pure form. It's always about trying to tease out its social life, its fantasy life, its significance, and to try to do that not just through a lot of text, a lot of manifesto, but to do it visually, through images, through display techniques, through telling a story with the objects themselves.
Who did the exhibition design on that?
My partner, Abbott Miller, and I designed the exhibition. So, for example, here's an ad for toilet paper, which gives you a very different view of how toilet paper was marketed in the 1930s as a kind of high-tech medical product. And the trouble began with harsh toilet tissue. So we had ads about bad breath and about body odor and about various aspects, packaging and food industry, various aspects of the social life of kitchens and bathrooms. I find these rubber gloves alarming, but interesting. And at the center of that network of products were these kind of more billboard-sized images of modernist American design, of the streamlined style of the 1930s, the kind of climax of American modernism, which we suggested was built upon an edifice of consumption in the bathroom and the kitchen. So at the very center was an image of Raymond Loewy, the great industrial designer, who often depicted himself with his locomotives, this great kind of phallic symbol of progress and modernity, and one which he designed locomotives that had this wonderful streamlined style with horizontal bands of chrome, and using technology in a very open way, not historicizing it, not stylizing it.
Much faster than they were, right?
Right. They're about creating an image of speed, exactly. And the other image there at the center of the gallery was an image of Raymond Loewy's idealized office space, which itself was a diorama created at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1934, in which he rejects conventional decoration of an executive office, which was traditional and used dark materials and heavy wood and draperies and carpets and so forth. And instead he has, a built-in bank of cabinets. He has fixtures that become lighting, that become furniture, that are physically attached to the shiny linoleum floor. The walls are curved so they don't trap dust. They become this very clean space, a space indebted to the modern bathroom, which way before Raymond Loewy made his office, used technology and materials in that very overt way to be clean, to celebrate a civilization of hygiene and bodily cleanliness. Or likewise, the kitchen, built-in kitchens emerged in the 1920s after the built-in bathroom, with its modular cabinets and its technology that was fixed to the structure of the room. So at the center of the gallery, we created this sort of complete Victorian high-tech bathroom with more fixtures than you would ever have in your own bathroom. A hip bath, a foot bath, this incredible shower. It's called a needle shower, that not only dumps amazing amounts of water on top of your head, but shoots water out at your body from the circular pipes which form the structure of the shower enclosure, as well as the plumbing. Well, museums of plumbing, which exist, and collectors of...
Kohler makes it Kohler.
So you could buy one.
So there are museums and who collects these objects?
You'd be amazed that people collect everything.
Really?
Yeah, I found people that collect dishwashers, washing machines, everything. You have to have a lot of room for that. Right. And the floor of the bathroom is tiled with 1,500 bars of ivory soap, which, unlike the peat moss, really does smell terrible. We had to open it all. Like, it arrived as a donation from Procter & Gamble, wrapped, of course. What else did we expect? And so we had to unwrap 1,500 bars of ivory soap. And we used the wrappers for pedestals for toilets and things. So another exhibition that built on similar ideas, similar themes, is called Mechanical Brides, which I did at Cooper Hewitt Museum in 1993, immediately after the show at MIT. And it built on the same ideas, but kind of asked, well, who was in charge of these new standards of hygiene in the home? And who was going to keep those shiny white objects shiny and white? And it was the American housewife. And in this exhibition, I looked at technologies which had been associated with women in the early and mid 20th century. And the idea of the bride, of the mechanical bride, as women becoming married to technology, technology as the savior, the knight in shining tinfoil that will carry her away to a more relaxed lifestyle. But also the bride herself becoming mechanized, the housewife becoming a kind of apparatus of appliances. So I collected all kinds of advertising depicting the kind of romance of technology. Here the young GI is going off to war, but he knows when he comes back the toaster will be plugged in and ready to go. Or here, the sort of matrimonial hearth, a refrigerator, a fridge designed by Henry Dreyfuss, GE. Or this is a relationship I never developed with my own ironing board, who I'm afraid but he's smiling and happy there. She's in her pumps. Or here, the engagement ring reflected in the surface of the toaster. Of course, the bride is the ultimate consumer. She's the one who has nothing, needs everything. How many toasters did we all get for our wedding? I hate to think. Or then this great image of what really happens when you get married. The sort of domestic scene here reflected in the surface of an electric coffee pot. Dad reads his newspaper while Mommy pours the piping hot coffee. And then in the exhibition, we showed, not only advertising, but physical objects. For example, the first fully automated washing machine, which I showed in relation to various images that suggested how it was used, how it was marketed, who used it, what its meaning was in modern households. It's wonderful how my Bendix does all the work of washing. And of course it was. This was an incredible technology that reduced the drudgery of really one of the most hideous of all household tasks. But at the same time, it also prevented laundry businesses from becoming corporatized and from moving outside of the home, which they had been steadily doing in the 1920s. So now the housewife could do all her own laundry, and she could wash all kinds of things that used to be sent out, like permanent press shirts, and she could do the towels every day, and so forth. She could, here she has all this free time to serve coffee and homemade pastries in the morning to her family. And this image of the beautiful washing machine in this most unglamorous basement gives you a sense that there's still physical effort involved with the work. So the imagery is all about liberation and freedom, the advertising imagery. The reality was that this continued to be women's work. And in fact, historians of housework and time use have found that technology had really no impact on how much time women spent doing housework. That as more technologies entered the home, they actually spent the same amount of time doing housework. They had higher standards of cleanliness and so forth. And that what, of course, did affect women's time was their entry into the labor force, at which time household standards declined precipitously, and you will find dust under many a fridge in double-income homes like my own. And in the exhibition, we made this beautiful laundry line with quotations of men and women talking about laundry, and we hung this in the Carnegie Mansion in this beautiful sunlit conservatory. And it gave me great pleasure to, in this historic home where the museum is located, to present these totally middle-class objects and to hang laundry in the conservatory. These are now curtains in my bedroom at home. Very beautiful. Nice typography. Mixing Messages is an exhibition about graphic design in America that I did in 1996 at Cooper Hewitt Museum. And I'll just show you a few things from that exhibition to give you a sense of how we analyzed artifacts from contemporary design. In this case, the real goal of the exhibition was to explain to a general audience, because Cooper Hewitt is a part of the Smithsonian and we deal with the public. These are not shows for designers. They're exhibitions aimed at the general public to raise their awareness of what design is, what its impact is in our lives. This was a room dedicated to typography, a beautiful little Beaux-Arts room that the architects and I developed an installation that turned the room into a giant light box so that the letter forms, the fonts are actually glowing with light. And then set into the light box were cases that had printed material dealing with typography as it lives. For example, I looked at the typeface Neuland, which was designed in Germany in the 1920s, was an expressionist typeface, which attempted to bring a kind of handmade aesthetic to typography. And I looked at how that font existed in contemporary American culture. Because that's what typography does. Typography is the blood of graphic design. It's a medium that flows through everything we make. And designers use new typefaces, they use old typefaces. They use them always in a way that expresses a cultural message, an idea. So I started collecting examples of Neuland dating back to the 1960s, where Neuland was associated with the African, with a primitive or folk aesthetic. It was kind of amazing. I mean, these are only a few of the examples that I have now in my collection of how this typeface came to express such a specific idea. And I think there are several answers for that. One is that the font in its form lends itself to such a reading, its blackness, its heaviness, its anti-technological message. And the other reason is that once designers start to do something, they become part of the vocabulary of society, and they get copied, they get reused, they become part of a kind of underground literacy. And that's often how design functions, that it functions through cliches, through the familiar. And when it's good, when it's inventive, design changes the cliche, but it's always working within patterns, within expectations. Another part of the show dealt with identity, with corporate identity, with cultural identity. And one of the things that I wanted to do was think of a way to show that design is big. And we think about logos, we think about them being very small, we think about stationery and business cards and these very insignificantly scaled objects. But driving past Newark Airport one day, I noticed that two of my favorite corporate identities of the 1990s appeared on airplane tails. And one is for Continental Airlines. And we built this enormous airplane tail in the gallery, this looming huge object that said design is big. And corporate identity is, of course, a huge part of the design industry. And it was interesting to make it literally, physically big. And the other side of the airplane tail was the FedEx identity from the early 90s, which I love because it was kind of anti-design. It said it's all about the name and not about stylized letter forms. And then surrounding that massive, that's Landor Associates in San Francisco. Surrounding it are objects at a more human scale to show personal identity, cultural identity, that designers give voice not only to huge, large-scale corporations, but to themselves, to subcultures, to bands, to political issues. So for example, these t-shirt designs by an artist named Tom McGlynn, these are t-shirts that were hanging around that giant airplane tail, where he takes very familiar corporate identities and finds a different message inside of them. So inside mobile, the word mob, inside Dunkin' Donuts, OD, and they're instantly recognizable because of the visual design, the literacy that we as consumer citizens of modern life, we are literate in an enormous number of brand identities, a terrifying number in a way. My kids, before they could ever read, could recognize McDonald's, Toys R Us, and so on, Coca-Cola, The Gap, without being able to really read a single letter. They could recognize the corporate identity. And then there's examples of designers who borrow those identities, who squat in them, who steal or subvert a very familiar image. This is an album cover, two-color printing for a band called Buzz Muscle. And the album itself is printed with the bacon pattern, which I really liked, so that you can see how much fat is in your meat by looking through the little window in the package. Or a band in New York called Lotion, which did this incredible poster campaign in the early 90s where they took all these very familiar corporate identities but rewrote what they were saying. And so they used that power, they used that equity, that familiarity to sell something else. Goes on. Mr. Peanut, Mr. Lotion. Finally, I just want to mention an exhibition program that the museum does every 3 years called the National Design Triennial. This was the first one in the year 2000, and it's done by a team of curators, and I represent the kind of graphic design part of it, and we show graphic design, architecture, furniture, industrial design, and it's very exciting because it's an opportunity to show these different media together in one space, so that you can see a typeface next to a piece of architecture, next to a handbag or a dress. And currently I'm working on the next triennial, which opens next April, where I'm going to focus on the idea of the designer as producer. So looking at people like Mike Mills in Los Angeles, who's a graphic designer who became a filmmaker, or Dave Eggers, the author and publisher, who designs and edits his own material and uses design as a content generating tool. What I want to end with is to show you a little bit about what my students at MICA are doing and how that relates to what I'm doing curatorially. I am not training my students to be curators. I'm not training them to be writers. I'm training them to be designers, and our program is very professionally oriented. It's an undergraduate BFA program. Our students expect to graduate ready to go to work. Some of them later go to graduate school, but the goal in a private art school is to be educating people to enter the profession after their senior year. I want to do that in a way that is nonetheless informed by history, by criticism, by a sense of the social role of design. And so we're really trying to mix a very practical education that gives them the technical skills and the aesthetic skills that they need with a sense of humanistic understanding of their field. I've been at MICA for 5 years. When I came there, we had 10 graduating seniors. 2 weeks ago at commencement, we had 40. Okay, and that reflects not only my role as chair, but the incredible cultural explosion of design in our time, the incredible appetite that people have for creating a form of art that is social, commercial, public, and political. And we don't bury any of those terms, including the commercial one. I see a lot of people wearing T-shirts with logos and interesting messages and so forth. Part of the fascination and thrill of design for me and for my students and for my friends is that it is overtly and openly commercial, that it openly participates in public discourse and therefore is keyed into style, to what's going on, to the immediate. We do not teach design as a timeless discipline where we're trying to create one form of expression that will solve everybody's problem. It is specific, it is situational, it is about a particular moment in time or a particular use or need. And to me, that's what makes design the most fascinating art form of our moment, is that it is openly engages in those things. So what I'm going to do, I want to just show you a couple of projects from my computer over here. I want to turn that off. Whoops, what did I do? Okay. And I want this to get us on. Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So this is a project called the Collection Project that I've given. You want some light to come down? Yeah, can we lower the light? Thank you. I give this to juniors or to seniors. I've done it twice, and it's really fun. What I do is everybody gets a baggie full of stuff, and it's all stuff from this plastics catalog. It all costs less than $1, and it's generic sort of industrial supplies. Things like a dust mask, earplugs, a plastic funnel, rubber gloves, and everybody gets the same stuff. And what they have to do is they have to create a lifestyle brand out of these objects. And we look at Martha Stewart, we look at Pottery Barn, we look at Dutch design, we look at Bliss Girl, we look across the map at how ordinary objects, essentially anonymous objects, are endowed with identity and purpose through design. And so each student, and some of them work in teams, I encourage them to work in teams, has to decide what these things are for, create a name and a product identity, and then ultimately represent that in a catalog, a print catalog, or a website that they art direct. So they have to create their own photography or their own illustration to represent these objects that essentially are blank, that are neutral, that by themselves could be anything. And they do all kinds of things. This pair of students created working light fixtures out of the objects, and then created all the packaging, which was all silkscreen packaging. They art directed the photography, wrote the catalog copy, and they were truly all working fixtures. They brought the light fixtures to class. And some of them looked kind of awful, but then the way they photographed them made them look fantastic. So there's a light fixture made from a plastic funnel. This is a light fixture made from a disposable flower pot, the kind of flower pot you can stick in the ground and it disintegrates. This team of students created right-wing surveillance technology. And so students can really go in any direction with the project. They can be very practical and really use the stuff for what it was meant to be used for, or they can make something new but useful, or they can create something that really serves more as social critique and that suggests a kind of use, an imaginary use. So here the funnel is a radar system. And these students did, all this incredible film noir photography in an underground parking lot in Baltimore. They created their own typeface, and of course they did all the copywriting and invented the whole idea for what the product was. So these are some of what they did. That's their radar. Here the rubber glove is used for, not leaving fingerprints on the elevator button. Those are the plastic safety goggles, which become some kind of, X-ray vision technology. Or these students created a line of sort of clubwear called Wannabe. And so they took all those products and they remade them into kind of sexy fashion. Wanna Dance. This is a mini skirt made out of rubber gloves. Wanna Talk. They put rhinestones on the cotton gloves, and this is the funnel, which reappears here now as a sort of brassiere. Wanna Dare. Or this student created flower pots and vases, and here she went for a very serious, sort of high design, Capellini, Italian look to her stuff. So some of the students take it in a humorous direction, and some of them take it in a very serious direction. And again, she did all her own photography, as well as figuring out how to use these products, in this case as kind of modernist vases and plant life display. Unsentimental vases. That's the dust mask, which becomes a corner-mounted holder for dried flowers. Okay, so that's one project. In another project, we asked them to create an identity for either a hospital, a police department, or the fire department. And the idea is for them to think about how these institutions, which we think of as public, have increasingly presented themselves as consumer organizations. That increasingly police departments, for example, think of the citizens of an area as their customers, as people who they need to present an image to, an image of kindness and compassion and fairness and so forth. Or that hospitals actively market their emergency rooms and their cancer operations and so forth to consumers. And so here's one of the students who took the hospital project and created a drive-in emergency room where he combined and did a whole study of different fast food identities and merged them into the one in the center, which is the McDonald's arch on its side, becoming the E for emergency. And this is a portable IV kit. This student decided to look at a kind of high fashion hospital and the idea of elite private hospitals, and so she created this sort of imagery. It's the ambulance. And so they have to think about design and identity as not just about a logo, but what does it say about an institution? What is its message? And what does it say about society? And they have to present these things in an absolutely professional way. They have to create corporate identity manuals for these identities. But they're doing it in a way that is also reflective and analytical and critical. So there's the IV bag, the Evian water. And then the final project I'll show you is called Coffee and Donuts. And sometimes at the end of a semester, I feel like people are overwhelmed by the intellectual pressure to invent all these ideas. So this semester, at the end of my junior seminar, I said, okay, the next project is just called Coffee and Donuts. And you have to create an identity for either a donut shop or a cafe. And it's incredible because we do a whole analysis of identity design in these spaces. And it gets them aware of how important design is to everyday consumption. The rise of Starbucks, for example. We covered a wall with coffee cups and bags from cafes. And what you could see from that was the hegemony of Starbucks. So any student that was going to do a coffee shop, they were forbidden to use the color brown, okay? They had to represent coffee without the color brown. So people used black coffee. It was great. So when we would look at, Dean and DeLuca and high culture and low culture, and then these are some of the projects that they did. And it was really fun because suddenly the pressure was off to have like a huge idea about society. And the great thing was they created incredible ideas anyway, given that opportunity. This is Puff's Donut Store. Okay, the last thing I'm going to do is I have a little film that I made about design at MICA that won't explain any of the projects. It really just gives you a sense of what we're doing. It basically has three parts: typography, packaging and product development, and design and society. And it's just a montage of student projects from the last 2 years or so. I want to give you a sense of the beauty of what these students are doing, that typography runs through everything that we teach. Concept development runs through everything that we teach. There's a sense of humor and a sense of play to a lot of the work, but it's also very beautiful, and so I won't talk anymore. I'll just let you see how beautiful it is. Okay, and that's the end of my comments. And do we take questions, or people need some food?
How important?
It's a microphone. From your experience, how important is it in this sort of assignments and exercises you're doing with your students, which I find very, very nice? I mean, some of them I find them super nice. How important is it that you provide these examples out from the existing world? So far as I understood, you give them, or you force them to.
I do an introductory lecture, usually with every project. So if we're doing something about, design in the avant-garde, I do a lecture about that. For the collection project where they get the bag of stuff, I do a lecture about Martha Stewart, Pottery Barn, and other forms of lifestyle branding. And I think that is important. I think a lot of them take that stuff for granted. And that, just like people do in general, they don't realize how important it is, how powerful it is, how imitated it is, how the degree to which it permeates our life, and the degree to which it is design-driven. Okay? People don't know it. And that's the thing about design, is it tends to disappear into the background. All my students drink coffee at Starbucks. I don't think they ever thought that that was a design-driven experience. And now they do. And in the coffee and donut project, I made them go out and bring in all the stuff, and we made this huge sort of semiotic chart on the board with the different cultural references, like Europe. Like, coffee is not grown in Europe. So why are coffee shops always pushing this European thing? And so a student came back and did a Brazilian coffee shop. That we got to think, like, well, why not? Why wouldn't you make your coffee shop about Central America? And so to me, that's really important, to get students to take a look at the messages that design is conveying and the power that it has. And that can sometimes involve looking at design history, but I think even more powerfully, it's about looking at design right where you're sitting. Barnes and Noble, like, what does that mean? So does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I just want to add one more question on that, and this is, how's your experience from, let's say, student answers as other variations on the same topic, or jumping into something, or inventing something what is not represented by the existing. You see, you know what I mean? How's your experience on these things?
Well, I think that different students have different abilities. That some students end up being working more as art directors, and I mean in their student work. And others become more design, inventing at the formal level. And I try to create situations where they can explore both of those. They all have to be able to create at the formal level, but some of them are more innately inventive with that, and some of them are more taste-making or developing a literacy with it. Students come at all different levels of skill and ability. I don't know if that answers you. I think design is always in the culture. So even the most inventive designer is still inventing in relation to a kind of shared set of ideas. I think art is that way too. I think the difference is that often artists are told that they're going to invent out of zero, that they're going to be pure originators, that they're going to make something that nobody else ever made anything remotely like that. And art is a discourse too. It's set of languages. Design is much more open about that. You know, that designers understand that they're trying to communicate an idea, and you communicate ideas through images that people understand. And you can do that in a very inventive and creative way, or you can do it in a dumb way. You know, and
but surely there are a lot of artists who recognize everything that you said about design. Can you talk about the relationship and the blurring of the art and design, specifically in technology? Where, you know, many artists are very conscious of social, political, commercial issues and have been since the 60s, actually.
Oh, definitely.
Right. So what is your take on that? Because you seem to have created a dichotomy throughout your talk of the art somehow being thinking that it's more high or pure in its endeavor, of people being taught to think that way about it, whereas design is much more in the world, right?
With design, that's the opening premise. We start from that.
Right.
That design is always reacting to a situation. It doesn't happen by itself. It's not private, it's not internal. And clearly art is that way too. I think there's more of a myth about art not being that way.
But there's equally a myth of design being purely functional and practical.
Right.
That myth is equally strong because we're surrounded by bad design that's non-functional and that doesn't take humans into consideration, or that doesn't deal with commercial, political, or the kind of higher consciousness that you're talking about. So I don't know that I necessarily agree with that dichotomy that you're positioning, and especially when you're making reference to people like Duchamp and artists who have very much addressed that a long time ago. And even from going back into Bauhaus or the Black Mountain College, you had the mix of artists and designers who are very much addressing that it's a blur, that it's a kind of a false stereotype that's being created. And I guess all of that is to lead to another question, your relationship to architecture and perhaps even further kind of ecology, because what I like about your work is very much the raising of consciousness about the role of design in society and how powerful it is. But I haven't really seen work that references kind of an ecological consciousness with design and the impact designers can have to raise the consciousness. So there is a kind of a critique of corporate structures and identity, but I'm sure you address it. But I'm just curious how you approach it with your students or in your thinking.
Well, you know, many of them like to read Adbusters magazine. So we did a project in the fall, this past fall, where they all got an issue of Adbusters and dealt with, they had to do something that commented on consumerism. What?
That's a great thing. He doesn't know about Adbusters.
Okay,
maybe
Adbusters
other people
is
don't.
a Canadian magazine that critiques the media and critiques consumerism, and often takes design as its enemy. But designers are very interested in it, and designers write for it, and so you know we get them to look at that and to try to take a position in relation to that.
But when you're talking about ecology, resources, for instance, you talk about Starbucks, there's a lot of other issues in relation to startups that I'm sure you're aware of. I mean, it's really endangering the natural forest. And, how do you go beyond the kind of tongue-in-cheek critique to shift it where the students or the future designers can actually make that a little bit more into the social consciousness, or do you attempt that even? It's a question I ask myself, by the way.
There are some projects where we ask them to think about those questions. I try not to dictate what their view will be.
No,
when we did the project about ad busters, there were students that did Shop America campaigns. This was in November of 2001, and we'd all gone to Ground Zero, saw it, and
What's so dangerous about Starbucks Cafe, Victoria?
Well, rainforest, I mean, they're using up huge resources in Brazil. They're clearing out, yes, and they're clearing out huge parts of, well, we can talk about that later.
Yeah, one of my students in that coffee project did a coffee shop called Campesinos.
Right.
That was going to only sell coffee created at small farms, family-owned farms. And so she took that direction on the project and did a really beautiful job with it. So we engage that to some degree. I don't dictate how they're going to approach it, though.
I didn't mean that as a dictating. I was just curious what your approach or vision is as an educator or an active participant in culture by doing. I remember the Mechanical Bride exhibition. It was hugely influential on me. I read that and I just thought, wow, this is amazing, the way you positioned it. So you obviously can really shift the way somebody perceives a toaster. And really change that. But I'm saying, how do you see yourself taking it a step further from commenting to having students, maybe a little bit addendum to Christian's question, rather than relationship to the existing and kind of commenting on it, inventing. That's probably the word I was meaning to say all along. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But what I really liked was what you said, that you have to understand in the first place that wherever you go, whatever you do, you are surrounded by designed appearance, or everything is designed, and this is to open people's eyes on that one is almost half of this project.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I agree with your philosophy 100%. I have a question, but I'm going to just add to this current dialogue. I think that designer is a nurturer.
Is what?
Nurturer.
Nurturer.
Neutral.
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 Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's automatic translation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Designer responsibility is communication, successful communication. Me as designer is divided as a citizen, as a member of society. My political view are not necessarily always parallel with my design when I work with communication. That's enough. I look at your student work, and it's a very formal. I didn't see enough of experimentation. How in your program you deal with experimentation when students go all the way on their limb and perhaps even make mistakes? Do you have that angle in your program when students do experiment?
What do you mean by experiment?
Experiment, doing the approach to their design by employing the types and in some way which we didn't see before. In other words, some of those things I saw, they look to me very conservative, which is normal for the students to be conservative. But I don't know how to describe experimenting, taking risk, I think I saw experimentation in a method of how you teach, in a terms going to some very known visual signs and so, and then the students work with that, you know. But
Well, I think in our typography classes, you might see more of what, often when I hear the word experimental design, it immediately signifies in my mind like exploded fonts, you know, like David Carson. And I think that, you know, that there's a tradition of looking at experiment as purely formal and not about analysis, cultural analysis or analysis of style or subculture. In our typography classes, it's a very formal subject, you know, very kind of pure and removed in a way. But even there, we're always asking students to represent ideas, you know, to express a concept, but through very formal means. Flush left, flush right, upside down, inside out. You know, we try to get them to look at very basic formal conditions of the letter, of the font, of the page, and how those can express an idea. And you know, that's always coming back to the idea is one way of approaching design that runs a bit counter to, I think, what Christian was getting at, the kind of pure invention, right? The originary. Yeah, and some of the students really do get into doing that. But I think us in the faculty, we are very concerned with the idea. And are you still expressing ideas through these forms? In the typography classes is where we deal with the kind of more pure, formal approach. Does that help? Okay.
well, that's awesome.
Okay.
That's how the book.
Yeah.
I was very impressed by the quality of your exhibitions and by the value, your efforts to generate a better taste, public taste. I was wondering if you carried the same efforts with your students in a place like Maryland. Is there any opportunity for some public policy for against visual pollution, or is there any initiative? Is there any initiative which your students in the school have started, perhaps election campaigns, things which could improve our environment? My question is there any initiative or any hope for an initiative?
No, no hope. You know, design is, yeah, it's viral, it replicates, it spreads, it creeps into every corner. I know what you mean, and I can imagine, you know, a landscape such as Amsterdam almost, but even there's some pollution. McDonald's, basically. You know, where everything looks great. But I'm fundamentally against that because...
Actually, it's not McDonald's, all these stupid canals, you know. They can't cross the street because again the canal.
I don't think, you know, it's a great idea.
So at MICA, in your curriculum, do you have writing courses for design students? Creative writing or
well, they have
critical?
to take writing classes through the humanities and liberal arts, but we don't have specific writing classes in the design program.
So there's nothing connecting, say, typography with creative writing? Or
There are specific courses that they can take that do that, like a course in fanzines that's actually taught in the printmaking department, a letterpress course, a book arts course. So there are classes where they can do that, but it's not required. It's not part of the given curriculum. Does that happen here? Are there?
No.
It's a good idea.
Yeah.
Do you know when, because I never thought about it, when did it start that companies, let's say like McDonald's or whoever, started to make all the little things they have around their products to design, I mean, the overall thing, even the dresses of the people working. When did that started, that companies?
I think the 50s.
In the 50s.
But I wouldn't want to be quoted on that. And it's certainly become more and more intensive. But I think it would go back to then. Anybody else know that? Okay, well, it's very warm in here, and there's some delicious food and cool beverages, so, and I'd be happy to